Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Hines, Executive Director of the Charleston Hub, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Experimenting and Implementing Evidence-Based Selection Options for eBook Investments. I'm going to give everybody a few moments to join and get settled. And while we do that, I have a poll question for you. As you're joining, let us know, tell us about yourself. Are you a student, a librarian, a researcher, a vendor, or other? And if you choose other, let us know in the attendee chat what type of attendee you are. It'd be really interesting for us to see that. Thank you all very much. I'll leave that poll open for just a moment as I go through a few announcements. We're glad that everyone's here today. Welcome. We have a fantastic panel lined up. This session is being recorded, and a link to the video will be sent to everyone who's registered for the session within 48 hours. So keep an eye on your inbox for that to come soon. I'll be monitoring the attendee chat as the session goes for any technical issues or comments, but we do ask that you use the Q&A tab to enter any questions that is content related for our panelists. That'll help us keep track of questions for the Q&A session later in the event. And finally, we ask that you would complete a very short attendee evaluation afterwards. You'll be redirected to the survey after the session closes, and a link to that will also be provided in the follow-up email with the video. So once again, welcome to everyone here. Thank you to Elsevier for sponsoring this session, and I'm going to turn things over to our moderators today to take us to the next step. Thank you, Kelly and Joanna.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. Hello, everybody. My name is Kelly Madiges, and I am joined by my colleague, Joanna Kilpatrick, and we are the moderators of this session. Joanna and I are both solution sales managers for the research references at Elsevier, and we are absolutely thrilled to have everyone joining this webcast today as we discuss flexible ebook collection models like evidence-based acquisitions. After seeing some recent Charleston newsletters and against the grain articles, Joanna and I jumped at the opportunity to work with the Charleston conference to not only open up this discussion, but expand it to some of our partners in the library community that have firsthand experience with these evidence-based options, all to understand what's worked best for them while budgets are consistently changing and patron needs are evolving. We have a handful of questions to ask the panelists today, and we would love to hear from the audience during this discussion. So we do anticipate that there will be time remaining at the end for audience questions. As Leah said, please feel free to provide questions and comments throughout, just dropping it in the Q&A box. And if you have specific comments around a particular panelist question, please just indicate that number. It'll be number 1 through 5, along with your comment. So to share the experiences and the feedback today, we are so happy to have 3 esteemed panelists joining us. We have Andre Rothemacher, Head of Acquisitions at the University of Rhode Island. Andre is responsible for the purchase and licensing of library materials in all formats and the management of electronic resources. An advocate of scholarly communication reform, Andre is active in promoting open access initiatives at the University of Rhode Island. We have Liz Mangel, Associate Dean of Collections and Academic Services at Johns Hopkins University. Liz concentrates on the development of strategies for long-term sustainable collections while delivering services to Johns Hopkins patrons that focus on supporting teaching and research. Also, Robert Thiessen, he is collections librarian at the University of Calgary. With nearly 25 years at the University of Calgary, Robert has worked several roles in the library, now working diligently in book acquisitions, making strategic decisions around content, access, and purchase potential. And we have a senior product manager of research references from Elsevier, Melissa Milazzo. Melissa focuses on the development of ebook models to ensure book content is made available in an option that best fits the needs of the library. Melissa is an advocate of innovation in publishing and is passionate about reimagining how users value digital content. So a very big thank you before we get started to the panelists for sharing their thoughts today. And before I pass this on to Melissa to provide an EBA overview, we did want to get an idea of your experience with evidence-based acquisitions, and we're going to put up a poll right now.
It looks like answers are slowing down on that poll coming in. We can leave it open for a few more moments if you want to go ahead with the next portion, and I'll put the results in the chat and display the survey results of the poll as well.
All right, that sounds good. Well, thank you so much for those introductions. We'll wait for those poll results to pop up. I'm guessing that since we had 70% librarians on the call, we're going to have a lot. Oh, there they are. Yes, look at that. 58% purchased EBA models already, and 31% have already heard of EBA models. And we've got a solid 10% who are unfamiliar with it, but very glad to see that there's no one who's in the wrong webinar. So good to know that we're all in the right place and we have some level of familiarity. But for those who are not familiar, I'll give a quick overview of the mechanics of the model, in part because there are so many important distinctions to make between EBA models and patron-driven or demand-driven models. So when we take a look at this, evidence-based acquisitions models are available from publishers and aggregators, but most of them work in the same way. At the start of an EBA subscription, a library pays an upfront fee that turns on a large number of titles. And in some models, the titles are preset by the vendor, say everything that publishes within a year. And in other models, a librarian can really customize what they get access to during the subscription period, probably by choosing a specific subject area or book type. Once a model becomes active, patrons reap the benefits of broad access. They can move across available titles without hitting paywalls and without incurring any additional costs for the library. Typically, EBA subscriptions are active for a period of 6 to 12 months, during which the patrons generate that valuable usage data. And before the close of the subscription, vendors pull that usage data and share it with the librarians. This is the evidence part of the evidence-based acquisition model. Unlike patron-driven or demand-driven models, there's no automatic purchase element in an EBA model. This means there's no usage or download trigger in place that would result in a perpetual selection being made without that librarian's input. So here, patrons have influence on the perpetual selections through the usage that they generate, but ultimately the librarian remains in control of which titles are selected for perpetual ownership. The librarians can interpret usage data or combine it with other metrics in ways that make sense for them and help them build a collection that best fits their institution's needs. And then at the close of an EBA subscription, a librarian can select titles up to the value of the fee that they paid at the start of the agreement. There can be a lot of variation among how many titles a library comes away with at the close of the deal based on the price of the individual titles that they select for perpetual ownership. Sometimes it can be a real balance between trying to get a larger volume of books versus getting specific books that may be more expensive. And once the agreement is closed, access is turned off for any titles that are not selected for perpetual ownership, and the titles that are selected become part of the library's perpetual holdings. And with that brief explainer, I'll hand it back to our host so we can get to the discussion.
Thank you, Melissa, for providing that overview on how EBA models function in general. So let's kick off our discussion with our panelists. Andre, I'll pose the first question to you. When did you begin EBA and what was the reason behind that decision?
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
I assume so, yeah. My lawn guy came right now. So our first EBA was with Elsevier in December 2017, and then we followed it with EBAs from 4 more publishers, 4 in 2019, 1 in 2021, and another in 2022. So we have quite a few of them running right now. What started it was Elsevier actually suggested that we try it, and I thought, why not? And then once I saw the benefits, that was a reason to continue. And just briefly, EBAs make a huge number of books available to our students and researchers. So our current EBA programs with 6 publishers provide access to over 90,000 books, and that's far more than we ever could purchase. And then because, as was explained, the decision about which books to purchase doesn't have to be made on usage, but we tend to just make it on which books were most accessed during that time period. We're buying things for our users that they're actually using, as opposed to just what we think they might have used. One thing from the back end that I really like about EBAs is that they really only require 1 transaction for all of this content. So it saves huge staff time, like it saves selectors staff time, it saves my acquisition staff time with ordering the books, and it saves me as an e-resource person staff time with activating the books. And also it saves us instead of paying many invoices, it's on 1 invoice. And then finally, EBAs are risk-free because you can, I think that typically they tend to be extended year after year, but they can be stopped. Like after your EBA period, you can say, okay, we're done. These are the books we're keeping. And you don't have to, you're not committing to an ongoing subscription. You won't lose access to anything you've actually purchased. So that's my comments on that question.
Andre, thank you. So Liz, I'll pose the same questions to you. When did you begin your EBA in your library, and what was the reason behind it?
So my story with EBA begins actually with DDA, or demand-driven or patron-driven ebook buying, which we started in 2010. Basically, I knew that I didn't want to order ebooks the same way we had ordered print books. That just didn't make any sense to me, either title by title or by collection. So the DDA model worked for us well, and it produced something else that I really wanted, which was user data. So we were able to look at that user data, see what people were really wanting and really actually using. And from that user data, we picked out publishers that were high in our DDA, and we worked with those publishers to do evidence-based models. So we moved from the DDA to the EBA on many of the publishers. My goal was really to create less friction in the research process and make it easier for scholars to get what they want 24/7 with very little intervention from the libraries. The model also had to be easy for our tech services people, and the evidence-based model is super easy for them. Andre had mentioned that too from her perspective, and it's the same from our perspective. So basically what started as an experiment really became one of our general collecting philosophies, and it's especially around ebooks, and it's one that we will continue to keep experimenting with and trying. So we think it's great, and don't know why everyone doesn't do it.
Liz, thank you. And finally, Robert, over to you. When did you begin EBA, and what was the reasons behind that decision for your library?
We started experimenting with EBAs in 2017, but I really wanted to talk about the pandemic and its impact on our collecting. We started several major EBAs, including Elsevier, in March of 2021. And there were several reasons for starting the EBA, but the biggest reason was the decline in print circulation and the huge rise in demand for ebooks. And yes, we had been seeing that before the pandemic, but that just happened in spades during the pandemic. So our library was closed from the middle of March until August 2020. Only library staff could enter the building. And even after we had partially reopened our library by September of 2020, we restricted access to the library and we closed access to the stacks. So there was just a huge demand for ebooks that, even though the trends had been there earlier, it just was hugely different. And another reason that we started so many EBAs in March of 2021 was because of our issues we had that fiscal year. And I'll just explain that our fiscal year runs from April 1st to March 31st. So the pandemic took a lot of different units in our university by surprise. And one of the problems they had was they couldn't spend money because everything had changed and they'd planned to spend money in certain ways, and all of a sudden they couldn't spend it. And so that money started getting returned back to administration. It was a very odd, it's not the kind of thing one normally sees. And so some of that money that was returned was redirected to the library. And so all of a sudden we had 3 or 4 months left in our fiscal year, and we had to quickly spend one-time money that we hadn't anticipated receiving. And so that money was used on several EBAs. And so our book expenditures for that year essentially doubled. And yes, I have a lot of similarities to some of the stuff that Andre and Liz have already mentioned as well.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for that insight on the first panelist question. It's really interesting to hear how these 3 institutions had made these selections for an EBA option. You know, Andre, with 6 different models that you're working with now, completely understand your idea of these models being risk-free, because essentially there's not the commitment is not as risky maybe as some other purchases. And Liz, you've got a lot of history working with these EBA and DDA options since, you know, you've been exploring these since 2010, I think you had mentioned. And Robert, understanding exactly how to sort of transition your budgetary allocations during that, you know, during the midst of the pandemic and things changing. It's really interesting to hear. So thank you so much for that. On to the next question. It does sound like the panelists, that all 3 of you have pretty positive feedback around your models. It would be great to get an idea, you know, how possibly some of your models could be improved upon. Liz, I will start this question with you.
Okay, so I'll start by saying I am entirely selfish in what I want. And when I'm saying that I'm selfish, it's really in my role as a librarian in a research intensive institution. I want as much content as possible available, which includes textbooks, reference, you know, whatever. I want it all. Secondly, I want stability in that content, meaning I don't want any stupid rolling wall or remove the content for some reason. Suddenly you had it and then you don't, and it's gone, and we're trying to figure that out. I don't want that. Also, I want the models to be really simple and easy to use and apply. So I'm not a big fan of the kind of complicated little sub collections, or this collection, and you can get this collection, but it actually doesn't include this kind of content here, or you can get this collection, but then you have to get this collection. So I just want everything, and I want it simple. For us, we actually spend more on our EBA models than we do on our kind of title by title or kind of collection-based buying in ebooks. So for us, it is the way to go. And so, like I said, I want everything. I want it simple. And I understand that's me being selfish, but I'm fine with that.
Great, Liz, thank you for that. And you know what, there's nothing wrong with wanting simplicity and wanting it all, right? Robert, I will pass that question over to you. In terms of the EBA models that you subscribe to or purchase now, any areas that you see improvement?
Well, I mean, I'll just mention Elsevier. I think we have the current 5 years. And so there would be some desire, certainly from faculty and students, to go back further than that. So that's an issue. Like Liz, you tell them you have an EBA for a publisher. Well, why aren't the textbooks there? Why aren't certain reference materials there? So those are things that our users want. When we first dabbled in EBAs early on, we would go into an EBA for a year and then make our selections and then leave. And so we did that for several years. And what happens when you pull out of an EBA, of course, students might not notice the books that are no longer there, but there's a long tail of books. There's you typically select the books that have the most heavily used. There's a long tail of books that are used 3, 4, 5 times. And if you pull out of the EBA, students typically don't notice if those books disappear, but faculty very much do. And so that's sometimes been an issue because people want everything, and then they're surprised when not everything is still there.
Robert, thank you for that. It's actually that last point that you make regarding content being available, and although all of it that you purchase for EBAs and certain models, I should say, will be available most likely, but it is when you pull that content out, even though the title may have had 5 uses, there could be a need for expanding to include more of that content, and really sometimes that might be a bit of an issue too. So thank you for that. And then Andre, I would love to get your point of view on any sort of improvements that you'd like to see with any of your EBA, any of the 6 EBA models that you have now.
Well, I liked what Liz said about the textbooks and reference. When I was thinking about this question, that didn't pop into my mind, but yes, that complication of the fact that reference books with more than one publisher are carved out, because they're more expensive, but why not? Yeah, there could be a model where they're included, and that would be helpful because it would be more simple. I would say probably the main thing that I would like in the EBAs, which we do not have with Elsevier, we also do not have it with 1 or 2 others, but with some of our EBAs we do have it, which is new titles added as they're published. Meaning as like in the current EBA, as new titles come out in 2022, they get added right in. And we have KBART automation turned on in our Alma library system whenever it's available, and we do have it turned on for Elsevier. And this makes that very easy because it means that as new titles pop into the EBA, we don't actually have to worry about loading MARC record files. Although with some of the other publishers that don't have KBART automation, we do monthly loads, and we're always a little bit behind, but it is nice to be able to offer people the new titles, our users, the new titles. And then we'd be able to spend our allotment on the more up-to-date books. And so 4 of our publishers of the 6 do include the new books. Similar to what Robert said, I think is expanding the access to the backlist content. The industry does seem to be moving in this collection with 3 of our other EBAs, including 1 large STM publisher, actually grants access through the EBA now to all ebook content on their platform. So it's everything. So that's what Liz said, it's simple. But if that wasn't gonna, in response to a later question, I was actually thinking like the EBA spend is a lot of money and this could be unsustainable in the future. So another option, instead of like expanding the backlist, especially after you've had an EBA for a number of years, like it might be the case that most of what would be used in the backlist is already used. It might be good to have a different model that you could choose to have maybe just the current year and the previous couple of years. So you're focusing on newer EBA content, but with a lower spend. I think that might be helpful as well. And those are my thoughts on this question.
Andre,
I
thank
just
you.
want to add, can I double down on what Andre said about the we haven't moved to Alma yet. So I put a note for myself on the KBART automation and how we need to get that turned on, but having the newer things automatically added, that would be awesome.
Okay, thank you for that. Andre, can I also ask you a question based off of your response? So that last point that you had made about, based off of your spending in some of these models and how the backlist content is not included, but maybe it wouldn't get used as much. Can you just expand a little bit more as to what you're saying, that maybe you would switch to an option that had front years and just maybe 1 or 2 of the back years? Was that what I heard?
Well, there's 2 things that are going on in that thought that I had. One is, I mean, like, I'm all for the backlist, but with pretty much each of our EBA programs, the commitment that we have to spend, like the dollars per year, is way more than we ever would have spent with that given publisher on either firm ordered ebooks or ebook packages. So basically, we've had the ability to say, all right, like, this is a great program, we're going to put a lot more money towards it than we would have other times. If this were to keep, like, right now, that's fine, but if we were to face budget cuts, but I wanted to keep an EBA going, I would like the option to maybe make it less expensive, but then limit the pool by focusing on newer titles. And then the other part of that is just that, like Robert said, the long tail is always there. So in the back file, there's always going to be, a new subject area that gets popular because of current events, and people will go into the older books. But I think we can also assume that our users are going to use certain titles, and then there are certain titles that probably, especially as they age, aren't going to be that important. And just to have the option of making the EBA less expensive by perhaps after several years of having the back file, then cutting the program a little bit smaller if necessary. Not necessary, if it wasn't necessary, fine, but if budgets were tight, that could help.
Awesome. Thank you for elaborating on that, just so I can understand it more and possibly, well, not possibly, bring some of that feedback to my product team as well. So really great feedback on that question, understanding a lot about, the automation with K-Bart and Mark seems to be really helpful, but some feedback that I think Joanna and I can take back to our teams as it, could relate to our model, really expanding out on some of the back file content, those back years, maybe including some of those newer years as soon as titles are dropped, that they be included in EBAs. And also looking at where else we can provide additional ebook formats in a particular EBA model. So Joanna and I are thankful to have that information from you. I want to just bring in Melissa to share, as a senior product manager, to share some of her or share her perspective on what she feels for some of what you all had said and what's next for maybe some of the models.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, I just want to say that everything that has been said here by our panel of librarians, I have heard from other librarians as well. This is very representative of the experience of EBA users, and then seeing where we can have improvements. And if I can sum it up, it sounds like we want improved simplicity and improved flexibility. The simplicity is huge. I understand that sometimes when you're running these models, it can, even though you have labor saving in some areas, it can introduce new labor in others when it comes to the cataloging, the K-Bart, the MARC records, all of that. So anything we can do to make that work as automated as possible is going to be an improvement for librarians. But the other part on the flexibility that both Liz and Andre brought up, we have customers who do want to have everything, like all books on the platform, available to them in an EBA model. And we have other customers who want to be able to flow back and forth and adjust their access year by year, either based on budget or, like Andre was saying, maybe they start to get saturated in perpetual ownership in some areas, or the programs that they have on offer change and they need to reallocate where some of that funding goes. So I've been running a year-long project to talk to librarians and to really examine our business model stack and figure out ways that we can make everything available to you, from everything on the platform is available in EBA all the way down to, I want to pick specific collections like Andre was talking about, like just the front list for this year, have it available as it comes out, and hold a few backlist collections as well. So this is part of how we're re-examining our business model stack for EBA, but I feel like we have the most work to do on those big all-inclusive models that include the textbooks, monographs, book series, everything you might want to get on the platform. So that's where we're putting our attention right now. Back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, everybody, for all these great comments. Your comments are definitely echoed by many of the libraries that I work with who are also doing EBA across different publishers, particularly wanting content like textbooks and reference material, and also the stability of the content within the EBA so that the content is remaining and it's not getting pulled out and replaced with something else. And lastly, along with the flexibility of how much content is included, the years of front list, so on and so forth. So I hear a lot of these same comments across the different libraries that I work with. So we'll move on to our next question, question number 3. This one I'll pose it over to Robert. Robert, what other models have you pursued in the past? And in comparison, how are you kind of choosing the decision to maintain with EBA?
Well, now I'm going to mention demand-driven acquisitions. I realize that Liz has already brought DDA up, but that used to be our preferred model for picking up ebooks. It used to be a fabulous model when short-term loans were inexpensive. Our old model was we would do a short-term loan 3 times, and then the 4th time we'd make a purchase. It was a very flexible model, and then in 2014, 2015, short-term loans just shot up dramatically in price. Some publishers embargoed current content as for DDA, and the whole model became unsustainable. In 2015, we just pulled out of DDA, and that's when we started looking at EB as another option. So that the big issue is we used to use DDA in probably in a similar way to how we're using EBA. We do continue to use approval plans. When we use approval plans, we exclude any publisher where we have an EBA because it would lead to unnecessary duplication if we had those publishers in our approval plans. And we also have a small list of university presses where we buy all their front lists. And we will buy everything they're publishing for the current year. University of Toronto, Harvard would be examples of presses that we find a lot of use in our campus. And so I think that's where we're at.
Great, thank you. And Andre, I'll pose the same question to you. What other models have you used in the past, and how is it compared to EBA?
Well, we never had a DDA. I just never went there, and I'm kind of glad because it didn't seem to work out for anybody. Currently, there are a few subscription book packages we have, but I never went too far into that either. I think that libraries need to own ebooks and not just rent them. But there's like some technology book collections, business book collections where we make an exception for that. I do buy every year a very large ebook package from a platform that offers content from a number of university press publishers. So you're getting a lot of different university press content with that, and that's successful. What I haven't liked as much is buying the annual kind of subject-based ebook collections from single publishers. I did a little bit of that, and I just thought it's too expensive. It's not sustainable. And then you're getting stuff that you just really don't want in there. You might get some stuff you want, but then there's just stuff that won't be used. And there is one large STM publisher that will only sell their books in packages or in EBA. So we do the EBA with them because I'm not going to buy packages. And we do, I'm talking only about ebooks here because we don't have a print approval plan. We still do a growing number of individual ebook firm orders through Gobi, which is our vendor. We continue to do so for publishers that we don't have EBAs with. But one nice thing about the EBA is it, like with EBA publishers, for the most part, we can avoid having to individually order books from those publishers, except if they're outside of the scope of the EBA, like a reference book or an earlier year. But ultimately, EBAs just provide a lot of content for very little effort. And then the content that you do keep is, has been used. And I think those things are both really good propositions. And basically, you're trying it before you buy it. And that's great.
Great, thank you. Liz, I saw you shaking your head, so I'm just going to pass it right on over to you.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of things that Robert and Andre have said already. Like I had mentioned before, we have done DDA, and we still do it. Our profile has changed, kind of significantly since we started doing the EBA models, where we've gone directly to publishers for the EBA models for those most heavily used publishers. One of the nice things about the DDA aggregator that we're using is they have a lot of very small niche publishers on it, and that's the only way we'd probably be buying those titles and those books from them is seeing them in this DDA model. And then, we have, like Andre mentioned, there is one large STM publisher where we buy collections from, because they don't have other models to buy their content from. And if they had an EBA model, I would flip in a heartbeat, because I think it is just a much better model for buying ebooks. We also do title by title, but that's kind of extremely limited. And it's mostly for our reserves rather than things that our liaison subject specialists are buying for the collection. So again, unless it's outside the EBA models, they would be buying some things title by title. I continue to use EBA because I believe it really gives our scholars a tremendous selection. They use things we never would have thought about buying for them. And because I do see the value we get from this, I continue to increase what we spend on EBA models. So whenever I get collection fund increases, I also find that I am increasing how much we are spending on our EBA models. And that's all the models, not just one particular publisher's model. I also find the use stats we get from our EBA models really compelling. And I actually wish I had much more time to play with them, because there's times when I look at a title and see that, it was super heavily used in one month and then not used at all for a while, and then superly heavily used in another month. And I always want to try to dig behind that and find out, well, what was going on there? Because you can kind of guess it's for classroom use, but what else could it be going on? So I really love digging into the use stats that we get. And I couldn't do that as easily with either our print books or, well, the DDA had really cool use stats too, but so the use stats have been fun. So I guess that's about it for me there.
Great. Thank you all. Those responses were really enlightening. And Liz, you make a really good point. One of the redeeming features of these models is that it ensures, perpetual ownership of the titles that are well used and really important to the long-term value of the library. So getting in and digging and looking at some of that data is, particularly helpful, I'm sure, when it comes to deciding what choices you are going to be making. And Robert and Andre, thank you for your input on DDAs, title by title purchases. And, Andre, that you mentioned the idea of trying before you buy, which is something that these evidence-based options are really ideal when it comes to, dabbling and really understanding what that use is going to be on campus. So we will move on to the next question. And so before I get into this, or just maybe as an intro for this, and I'll start with Andre here. Since there are essentially two entitlement periods with an EBA model, one at the start and another at the close when perpetual titles are selected, sometimes there could be more work associated with those models versus a standard subscription or a perpetual ownership option. And so in your experience, when it came to setting up and managing your evidence-based models, your evidence-based acquisition models, overall, what was required from the library for the setup and, to continue managing it?
My answer might not, every library uses different systems and has different processes. So I'll just say what I do. First of all, University of Rhode Island is a state land grant flagship research university, but our library is extremely leanly staffed. We have one cataloger, one. He's also our department chair and our head of government publications. So his time is really limited, one professional cataloger. So I try not to demand too much of him. Also, I am the co-chair of NISO KBART Standing Committee, which is different from KBART Automation, but KBART Automation is like the love of my professional life. If people don't know what it is, your system vendor has to be working with the publishers to do it, but basically it's an automatic holdings feed, so that whenever you get new ebooks or even e-journal content from a publisher, it's automatically updated in your knowledge base and therefore in your discovery layer. Elsevier actually invented KBART automation, and then it became formalized as a NISO recommended practice. So we use Alma. We have KBART automation set up with Elsevier, which basically means once a week, our system reaches out via an API to Elsevier and updates all of our holdings in our knowledge base, whether it's journals or ebooks. Ebooks are in one collection, journals are in another. And as far as I'm concerned, this is magic because there's no need to load MARC records. Any changes, whether new content added to the EBA or at the end of the period, like the purchased content, it's all in this collection, it's updated. A possible disadvantage is that the books that you're sort of leasing as well as owning are in the same collection. Some librarians feel strongly that we really need to put our purchase titles in a different collection to keep track of them. I totally understand that. I just think the benefits outweigh the disadvantages of KBART automation. Some of our EBA publishers do not yet do KBART automation. And so for those, we've either had to log into the admin module and grab the latest month's worth of MARC records, which frankly didn't happen very often. It would happen only when we'd feel guilty and know that we needed to go do it. There's a couple other publishers where they kindly email us a MARC file each month. And then my cataloger uploads that, but sometimes there's a little bit of a delay with that as well. So that's and with those publishers too, at the end of the period, I do actually tend to separate the purchase content into its own collection, and that's more work for me as opposed to support staff. But EBAs do save time, and that's really set up, but they're still saving time in terms of invoices to pay, orders to maintain in the system, and for selectors, because everything is in the EBA, they don't need to be selecting it individually.
Great, that is helpful information, especially when it comes to, time saving and how it's presented to, or how your selectors decide and make those decisions. I'll move to Liz to provide some feedback on this question.
So I'll be pretty quick because I know we're getting close to our time here. For us, the EBA model is much easier to administer on the back end, in large part because we capitalize our collections. So we have to separate the difference between what is leased and what is owned. And rather than going into a lot of accounting rules for people, I'll just say over our tech services and acquisitions people are much happier with the EBA than they were with the DDA when you capitalize your collections. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Liz. And because we're a little bit shorter on time, I'll just throw it right over to Robert.
The University of Calgary is a lot like the University of Rhode Island. We're an Alma ex-libris shop, so we love activating EBAs in the Alma community zone and then having things update automatically. We do have some EBAs where our metadata staff have to download records on a monthly basis as new things get published. And it's not the end of the world, but it's another process they have to monitor and maintain. So we much prefer having things with KBART. On the other end, I will do a draft selection list all based on usage, and we'll run it by our liaison librarians. And sometimes they're surprised because usually anywhere between 10 and 20% of the books have received use. The others haven't. And sometimes they're quite surprised that books in their area haven't been purchased. But we get some input from them. That's it.
Awesome. So I think we'll pass it over to Joanna for the final panelist question.
Thank you. This has been a great discussion so far, and we appreciate all that you have shared. We have a final quick question for each of our panelists. Liz, looking forward, how do you think EBA models will fit into the future acquisition strategies, either for your library or just in general?
I think I said it earlier, it is a key part of our ebook collecting strategy, and it will continue to be. I'm continuing to look at more of them as we move forward. I find them to be really the best way to be bringing ebooks into our collections, especially, like I said, in a research-intensive institution where we really can't guess what people are going to be getting into. So for us, they're here to stay.
Robert, and for you, your final thoughts on EBA for the future?
On the one, it's a great model. It's replaced DDA for us because, again, we can't predict what people are going to use. And so it's a great way of getting access to a large collection of material and then selecting the most heavily used material. We do worry at the University of Calgary about sustainability. I don't have any great answers to that, but it is a concern. Thank you.
Lastly, and Andre, your final thoughts?
Yeah, my ideal world would be EBAs plus KBART automation, and then I could just sit back and relax. And that being said, I think what my earlier comment about with the sustainability piece, maybe being able to limit an EBA to the more current content if necessary fiscally.
Awesome, wonderful. So thank you to our panelists for answering those 5 questions that we had. We have a couple of minutes. We have some questions that have come in, and I will just start with them. I'm going to try to direct them to the panelists. Just, you know, it might be a little bit easier since we don't have a limited time. Robert, I'm going to pass this one to you because you had brought up approval plans during one of the panelist questions, and a question has come in: have you fully removed these publishers from print approval plans? And are there any problems or concerns that you see for titles that might be missing because they've been excluded from an EBA collection?
We've blocked them from our approval plans for both ebook and print. I am aware that if we needed something that we missed later on, we would have to firm order it. But we fully dropped them. There's just too much risk of duplication otherwise.
Great. And I'll just ask Liz and Andre if you have any. Liz, I see that you've gone off mute. Did you want to share your thoughts?
We have removed some specific publishers from, but I'm actually okay with a small amount of duplication in print and electronic, especially if it's a faculty requirement that they want the print, or the liaison decides that the print is important to have to. As long as we're not duplicating everything, I'm okay with a little bit of duplication. So we try not to block very much, and that kind of pushes things a little bit more on the subject specialists to kind of check on that. But so far, we haven't had a lot of duplication on that.
Great. Thank you for that response. Another question that came in that goes with that panelist question number 4, really around implementation, managing, and maybe some marketing here. So the question is, understanding the communication strategies that the libraries have employed to communicate EBAs to subject librarians and researchers. There's quite a bit of variety on how publishers describe EBAs. So, and so much nuance depending on the publisher and plan. Did you all, was there any sort of strategy in place on how you presented these options to your teams?
We don't do a ton of marketing. We put the records in, and then the use kind of just goes. Like I said, we have a very research intensive institution, and so it doesn't take a lot of marketing for us to do this. We let our subject librarians know, they let their departments know, and then we just kind of sit back and watch the use explode.
We would only tell liaison librarians. We tell our selectors because it's very important for them to understand what we're doing, but we don't advertise it at all to faculty or students. We let them discover the titles, and usually things just take off.
That makes 3 of us. We don't advertise acquisition models to users. We just make the material available. Our selectors have been told we have EBAs, but they all are selecting on top of their other jobs, and it may or may not really compute. But since they're supposed to check our holdings before doing any orders, I imagine that they would check the holdings and then say, oh, we have this book already, and then, just not make a selection.
Okay, great. Andre, I'm going to stick with you for this next question that came in. Since you had mentioned you are working with 6 other publishers for your EBA models, the question was asked, what type of publishers are you working with? Not so much the names, just what what type of industry or academic trade?
Yeah, including, so Elsevier is one of the 6. We have EBAs with 3 of the large STM publishers, which people can probably imagine who they are, and then 3 other large academic publishers that you wouldn't consider STM per se. And really it was just like, those were the libraries that, the publishers that approached us with these options. And there was another question in there, our total EBA spend, and again, this depends on the institution, but for the 6 is about $250,000 a year, roughly.
And I'll add on to what Andre said. We have about 6 EBA models too. Again, 3 kind of big, heavy STM, because we are actually a pretty big STM school. 1 that's pretty much humanities, 1 that's kind of focused on university presses. So all of them are academic in nature, and all the ones that I'm looking at for adding on are also academic in nature. And I'm not sure what my spend is now, although I just did my budget. I can't remember what that number is, but I did grow it based on how successful the programs have become.
Okay, thank you. Let's see what other question. Okay, another question that came in is regarding the selection process. At the end of that, open time frame, 12 months or so. So at the end of that period, do you engage with your selectors or liaisons to make those choices? Or do you otherwise share information about that use or your selections with your team, your selectors, your liaisons? How does that work?
At Calgary, we do a preliminary selection based on usage, and then we run it by our selectors, and we allow them to bump lower used titles off in exchange for other titles. As I was saying before, the big surprise is that we tend to see that in a given year, 10 to 20% of the EBA gets used. And so some selectors are a bit shocked at what hasn't been used in their areas.
I pretty much do the selection myself, maybe with one other colleague, just because we try to move things along, and if it gets hung up waiting for someone else to make decisions, it just takes too long.
I do it an even easier way. Definitely I don't include the selectors. They're too busy. We're too thin staffed. And I don't even want to go through I look at the list, but I don't even want to go through it myself. I often say to my publisher rep, just go down on usage from the most used to the least used and send me, like, I'll approve it, but like, you do the work for me. I'm paying you the money, you do the work for me. Tell me what the most used titles are and how many of them I can buy, and then let's just call it a day.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I've recently had one of the publishers, and I'm not sure if it was you, Kelly, who made some suggestions for me, and then I could tweak some things. And mostly I do that because there's the different Hopkins libraries contribute different amounts of money to the program. And if it gets weighted a little bit too heavily towards a discipline that hasn't contributed significantly to the funding of the program, I kind of adjust some things. So, but the more help we can get from the publishers on suggestions, the better, the easier it is for me.
Great. I'm glad that information is helpful for you. We might have time for two more, or maybe just one more. There is a longer question that was included in the Q&A that I'm going to pass over to Melissa. It's a question that relates to perpetual selection.
All right, thanks for that, Kelly. Yeah, we had somebody asking, how does perpetual selection and cashing out your initial spend work if you have a multi-year EBA deal? And I can't speak exactly for other vendors, other publishers, but I can tell you how it works at Elsevier, and that how we do it is pretty standard. We typically only run our EBAs for 1 year at a time. It's a 12-month period. You keep access to the books for the entire time during that 12-month period. It's only when you come to the end that you are put in the position where you have to pick titles for perpetual selection. And in the example given, the person who asked the question said, what happens if I spend $100K in my upfront fee to get an EBA for year 2023, but at the end of the year, I only decide to buy $30K worth of books for perpetual ownership? In our model, that's not how it works. The fee that goes in upfront is the amount of perpetual ownership that you get coming out of the end of the deal. So it's not in flux or a sort of holding account that you can get set aside funds and get a refund from at the end of the year. And part of what we do is we work very carefully with customers at the outset to make sure that what they select is based on turnaways that we see on the platform. We try to make sure that you're going to get really strong usage out of the content that you picked for the access period to ensure that you have enough highly used titles to use up all of the fee that you paid at the start of the EBA deal. So with us, we try to keep it to 1 year. You get full value for what you paid in at the beginning. That's typically how it works. And I'll hand it back to our hosts.
Great,
well,
thank you, everybody. In the essence of time, we'll kind of close things up. I just want to thank very much, just want to say thank you very much to all of our expert panelists. It's been a great discussion around the use and the benefits of EBA. And also thank you to all of our attendees for joining. The Charleston conference is just a couple of months away, and we look forward to seeing everybody in November if you're going to be attending. And to further our partnership with libraries and fostering discussions around topics that are important to you in the library community, Elsevier is going to be hosting a luncheon at the upcoming Charleston conference on how libraries and research-focused publishers can better support education through non-traditional materials. So more information will be forthcoming on that, so just keep an eye out on your email. And again, thank you to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.